Hi, everybody. Welcome to Windows Security Monthly. This is episode number 2. This is recorded February the 18th, 2011. With me is my co-host, Gil Langston of GFI Software. And this is a show that's dedicated to all things security in the Windows computing environment. Gil, how are we today?
Doing just fine, Bruce. Thanks a lot. It's good to see you.
It is. You just got back from California. What were you doing out there?
I was at the RSA security show there in San Francisco, just talking to a lot of the different companies out there about security these days.
Who, and kind of give us an example of some of the folks that were out there.
Well, I mean, you have everything from, let's say, your web content blockers, people who do vulnerability scanning and compliance auditing, to antivirus vendors. And then, some more high-tech type of stuff, too. They're very specialized security products. I ran into a few different companies that do that single log-on security appliance type thing. So,
okay.
I mean, it can vary, but the real thing is that people gather there to talk about security, new trends, what's coming down, what they're seeing out there in the wild, and then ways to protect yourself against it.
What anything really super cool that you saw out there that really sticks in your mind?
I mean, I can't say that there was any one thing that jumped out at me. When you go to these shows,
yeah,
there's just so much, and there's lights, and there's things spinning, and there's big dashboards and screens, and sometimes, there's a lot of cool stuff, but it's really hard to nail any one individual thing that's super cool. I just enjoy all the security conversations and security products. I just think it's a really cool space.
It is cool. We're getting a little bit of thumping in the audio. I'm not it's negligible, but I'm picking it up through the headset. So, folks,
Okay.
If you're hearing a little bit of thumping, it could be a Skype issue. We're going to try to work on it as the show goes by. Our topic of discussion today is securing your email, and that is. Email, I guess, more than anything else, is the lifeblood of a lot of businesses out there. It is here, and keeping everybody safe on the network is so vitally important. It's a dangerous world out there, and Gil, you know probably as well as I do because you've been in the trenches. Probably heard a lot of horror stories. So what's going on out there right now?
You name it, right? I mean, most of the mail that's out there in the world is either advertising or malicious. It seems like there are so many people trying to find ways to get into your network, to get information, sometimes just to cause trouble, right? It just depends on who's doing it. But the trick is that email is a really easy way to get to somebody because the nature of email is communication. So you want to be available for communication, but the problem is that does leave you vulnerable to things coming in through email. Attachments are one of the number one ways to deliver a malicious package into your environment. So while email, as you said, is the lifeblood of a business, it could also be its demise if you're not careful.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely true. And the thing about it is, I've seen companies, if their email server went down, for example, they were really out of business.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are companies that say 2 hours out of business could mean, a couple of $1 million lost in productivity, billing, that sort of thing, as well as possible loss of customers from non-response, right? So it really does. It controls your business. Most people live and die by email.
So, and that's just being down. But just being down is bad enough. But then you also, I think last time we got together, I mentioned a small company that had contracted a virus on the network, or right. I should say, a botnet, and it basically hijacked their Exchange server and started spewing out lots of spam.
Absolutely.
And they got on some multiple DNS blacklists out there.
Right.
And all of a sudden, what happened is that people could not get email from their domain.
Right. Absolutely.
And so not only, I mean, it wasn't that their Exchange server had quit working, but
Right.
it effectively couldn't deliver email.
Sure. Absolutely. Anybody who is using those blacklists to clean their mail or to check the mail against it, they're going to be blocking those messages. So for all intents and purposes, your mail is down in their eyes. They're not receiving mail from you.
And
that's bad.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that. I mean, that's bad news. That is, and especially because in a lot of situations there, you think you're up and running. You think you're going. You're sending these emails. They're not making it. They're being blocked.
Let's talk about that process for a little bit. I mean, there's Spam House and some others. What's the big DNS blacklisting services? Spam House is one that comes to mind. What's some of the others?
Sure. I mean, and you've got Sorbs.
Okay,
you
Sorbs.
have. I mean, there are a lot of them out there, and depending on too what type of blacklisting you want to do. Right. There's domain blacklisting.
Right.
There's simple IP address blacklisting. So there are several different levels that you can look at as far as blacklisting. So sometimes it is just, hey, these emails are coming from a known IP range of spammers, or we've checked and these domains are definitely spammy domains, if you will.
So if I get put on one of those, okay, or if I get put on multiple, I have to then deal with multiple organizations to get my IP address removed from those lists.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to get in touch with each one of those, let them know that you are a valid company, and possibly show some proof of an issue that you had that you've then rectified, so that you can get off the list. And it's still not instant. I mean, by nature, if you could simply call them and get removed, the spammers could just get off the list by calling them. So
right.
There's a process, and it takes time, and that's downtime.
All right. What other potential headaches are we looking at then, Gil?
Well, when you talk about spam and you talk about email threats, so there's a couple of different levels, and I mentioned that earlier. You have your malicious content, things that are trying to get in your network and infect, possibly get information. You've got other malicious content, which is like phishing emails, for example, where I'm going to pretend to be Bank of America, and I'm going to send you an email that says, "Dear customer, we had a problem with your account. We need you to log in here. Give you a link. Please log in and resubmit or change your password, or give us your password and your information." You're going to log into that site, which is actually a screen scraped version of the real site. It's a fake site. Mm-hmm. And they're going to trick you into giving your information. That's a form of social engineering. And it's very rampant out there today. Everyone from eBay to, as I said, Bank of America and other banks have been spoofed or have been victim to this, somebody else pretending to be them to get your information.
That I tell you, in the last, 5 years or so, I guess I've seen a big trend in spam going from trying to get you to buy, the Viagra stuff and all that, over to trying to get your bank account information, your logins to say PayPal, and
right.
I probably there for about a month I was getting 2 or 3 pieces of spam a day about PayPal, for example.
Right.
Just one after another. And occasionally, it's just a pure numbers game. You may not do business with Bank of America, but these guys keep mixing it up until eventually you're going to find something that looks quite real.
Right, absolutely.
Oh my
you're
gosh,
think this is your bank. They've stolen all the logos and all the things.
Yeah.
It looks like it's from your bank.
Exactly. But isn't it important? Isn't it important that we deal with this stuff? You've got to deal with this stuff before that email is relayed to the end user in their, to their workstation. It really needs to be server-sided, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, because once it's in the end user's hands, the risk goes up greatly that somebody will see it, mistake it for a real email from that company. But if you keep it from even reaching that point in the network, well, you're taking that element out of it. You're letting the decision be made at a level where an end user never sees that email. And I think that's the most important piece. I mean, there are plenty of clients out there that can block spam. You are on your email clients themselves, and every time you access emails or pull emails down, it's going to check those. But there are a few challenges, the one I just mentioned, but at the same time, that means that you also have something consuming resources on your endpoint machine, that extra module running there and in a network on all those machines. Why not just centralize that to one location, catch it at the front door, and keep that from getting all the way down to the machine in the first place?
All right, yeah, but here's the thing that I think that some people make this mistake. I think they believe that if they put like an antivirus program on their workstations, and some of them, can look at Outlook, for example, whatever. They think that's enough.
Right, and so
I don't see it that way.
No. I mean, this speaks to our conversation last week, too. Layered security. You need to be able to catch these at as many different places as possible. So let's say I do have AV and I have something that can check for viruses, that sort of thing at the client level. That's fine. But if you have something at the gateway, again, why even download something? Why increase your chances exponentially of actually getting infected by one of these viruses when you can take care of it at a level where no one has access to that? So some of these emails that are laden with viruses and attachments, keep them away from those end machines. It's just too much risk.
One thing that we also have to remember, it's unfortunate because I'm not a big fan of HTML email. I don't know about you, but I've never been a big fan of it.
No.
But pretty much, I'd say 3/4 or more of the email I get is HTML-based emails, right?
It is these days, yes.
And has there been an increase in the number of what seemingly ordinary-looking emails contain malicious code within the HTML?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Do we call that malformed HTML, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's talk about that. Well, let's talk about what that can do, and I'm going to leave a little bit of it up to you as the expert on that.
Right. Well, that malformed HTML can essentially submit commands on the machine. So when you have this HTML in there are things that are going to go on in the background simply by the way that HTML is crafted, and you're never even going to know about it at all. So it's important, too, to be able to pull that type of content out of emails. There may still be some important content that you need to see in that email, but it's really important that when somebody goes to click on that email, that it's not going to have that code in the background when you click on the email. So I do think that there is value in receiving part of that email and knowing that you've received it, but keep the dangerous content away.
Okay. What are some of I know that spammers, and the simple spammers out there, the ones doing the Viagra and the pump and dump stock guys, they're all the hopeful.
Yeah.
Those I don't really worry too much about. It's the doggone phishing people that really scare the out of me, and I imagine it does to about any network administrator. But and these guys are also putting an incredible load on your Exchange server as well.
Well, sure, absolutely, because all these things are coming in. You're having to process them one by one, but they're also filling up your mailboxes. If you're not actively blocking this content, it goes into your Exchange server. And anyone who's had to administer an Exchange server before knows that the larger your mail store gets to, the longer backups take, the harder it is to maintain, the less performance you get on the mail clients, right, when they're accessing the Exchange server. So it's really important to get rid of just all this garbage before it is put into the mail store.
I think one feature that was added to the last version of Mail Essentials, for example, is called gray listing.
Right. Absolutely.
And essentially, that's based on a protocol, what's called one of the RFC protocols of an exchange of an email server.
Right.
If I understand that correctly, essentially, I'm pretending I'm an Exchange server. You send me an email, I'm going to question that and basically I guess in a way kind of reject it, and I'm going to send you a message back asking you to resend the message.
Correct.
Okay, and then
right.
We're following the RFC protocol at that point, and
right.
you, the sending exchange server, go, no problem, I'm going to resend it again.
Right.
Then once I get it the second time, that satisfies me to believe that you are another legitimate email sender. Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
Yeah, you do have it right, because the RFCs do dictate how a mail server behaves. If you want to send email,
okay,
you have to follow these rules. So, as you said, you receive the email. You say, listen, I'm not too sure about you. I need you to resend. If it is a real mail server, it will resend that. And at that point, that gray listing module says, great, thank you. You're now an accepted sender. Now, spammers, they don't use exchange servers. They don't have a full network and everything set up.
Right.
They have these little mail clients,
right?
Little programs that just regurgitate and just spew out thousands and thousands and thousands of emails to these domains, just hoping that they're going to get some in. So these programs don't listen for those return messages back. They just move on.
Right.
So that means that you'll never get that resend on the spam. So gray listing is a great way to really just knock a lot of those spammers with their little programs right out of the equation.
Years ago, there were, and I don't know if these guys are still around, but they were in the business of selling software for bulk email.
Right.
Okay, and they would have people that all they did was troll around looking for open mail servers, unsecured mail servers.
Right.
I'm going to assume those people have not went away.
Oh, no, not at all. Relaying, exchange server relaying, it's a big deal, right? Because there are a lot of applications you might have in your environment that need to use that exchange server to send emails out. So generally what you'll do is allow just the IP addresses in your network of trusted devices to be able to use that SMTP part of the exchange server to send emails out. Well, if you don't set that properly, then any machine out there can contact and then request that you relay that message on to another server. So that actually makes you complicit in the act in a way. And that is another way that you can get put on blacklists. If you're an open relay, then you can get blacklisted as well, and that can cause a lot of issues for your company.
I think particularly in the world with you've got people that's like doing your say small business server that comes with Exchange,
right?
The kind of do-it-yourselfer type of guys, they get it basically up and running,
right?
But they're not familiar with all the ramifications of not, because unless something's changed dramatically, Exchange in itself does not really come set up properly as far as security stuff comes. More or less, I think it comes kind of out of the box, sort of wide open, doesn't it?
Well, not so much anymore, Bruce.
Okay.
They have, as far as the settings, made it a little better.
Okay.
So that actually when you set up Exchange, the newer versions, let's say,
okay,
you do have to actually allow anything you want to relay through there. So the security or the default configuration when you install has improved a lot. There are still things you can do to harden up any server. Lock down all of those different ways that it can be accessed other than through authenticated, valid means that will help protect your environment.
Well, I haven't administered an Exchange. Exchange Server 2003
right.
Seemed to me to be somewhat vulnerable when you first installed it.
It, in fact, was.
Okay.
2003 was really easy. If you just installed an SMTP server or an Exchange server and just set it up, there was a really good chance that if you did not take the steps, whether it be a best practices guide or something out there, then you were, in fact, vulnerable to being a relay.
Exactly. And so they've made some advances in that Exchange Server 2007 and Exchange Server 2010.
Absolutely. I think they learned from some of those issues and have hardened it up so the default install leaves you protected a lot more.
But nonetheless, you can get around this stuff if you know what you're doing, and that's what these spammers are up to.
They're getting smarter and smarter, and they learn from each other. They learn from different things that are out there, vulnerabilities that are published, right? So we talked about that in the last show. If you're not taking care of those, someone can exploit one of those to get access and cause some major damage.
So isn't the end game then for the bad guys, if we want to call them, we'll call them the black hats for short, isn't the end game for black hats really to try to get botnets on your network? Wouldn't that be the holy grail for these guys?
Well, sure, especially when you're talking about somebody who gets paid for every email that's sent, delivered, clicked, right? Because some people will, what they'll do is put little remote images in the email that has to pull down from somewhere else. And that's how they can verify that you have received and clicked on that email. So somebody's going to really, as you said, the holy grail, they want to infect a network with botnets that will do their work for them so they can get paid off of all those botnets sending out emails.
What about, there's got to be $1. I hate to do this, but I think we're all, big boys and girls here. Ultimately, everything boils down to money. And these things have an intrinsic dollar value. That's, botnets used to be very expensive to rent. Now that's a hyper-competitive business because there's so many of them.
Right.
But how does one measure the economic loss? And I'm sure GFI probably has some numbers floating around somewhere, just ballparks or estimates. What, at least companies in the United States, lose in revenue every year based on dealing with spam? It's got to be a massive number.
Oh yeah, it's in the millions and millions, tens of millions, dealing with spam. Probably in the 100 millions at this point. But,
I would think so.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers in front of me right now, but I do know we've done some research on that. But it's the money, it's the time. That time could be spent developing your company and getting business done rather than dealing with things on the back end that slow you down.
So, okay, getting people to go, let's talk about some of the techniques these guys are doing. Okay, so we know that they're obviously broadcasting spam from these type of things. We know that they're using, at times, malformed HTML in the email bodies.
Right.
We know that what phishing is. We know that they're putting links in there to websites that will try to download a payload to your computer. What other trends are we seeing out there? What might be on the horizon? Any idea there that might be coming up?
These are all tried and true methods right now.
Right.
The links in the email are still big, right?
Right.
Any kind of link. It doesn't even have to be a phishing email. If you can get somebody to click on a link in an email that goes to a known provider of malware, you're pretty much in, right? It's social engineering. So the content of the email that says click here to view this, or I remember you get those ones, see Lindsay Lohan naked.
Oh God.
All of those things that would come.
Why? Just follow her in court. Just watch her go to court. I'm sorry.
That's fair. That's very fair. Nice. I like it.
Okay. I'm sorry about that, folks.
But the thing is you talked about methods, right? So there are a few categories of the types of spam or reasons to get that spam in, but how do they do it, right? So we talked about phishing, but how do you get those emails in to an environment, right? Mm-hmm. So things like spoofing. We talked about this email looked like it came from Bank of America, right? Well, one way you can do that is that you can change the headers of that email to make it actually look like it came from Bank of America. Or any address, Microsoft.com. They had their own issues with people pretending to be Microsoft for a while and getting those in there. Or even more so, emails that look like they're addressed to you and they're from you as well. Mm-hmm. This is a great way to circumvent any protections because some people will whitelist internal addresses so that their mobile devices can send emails in. Mm-hmm. So they'll take advantage of that if they get the username or the email address and say it's to you and from you, come straight to your inbox.
Right.
It's crazy. They call it spoofing. And there are ways to protect against that as well. You have Sender Policy Framework, which is essentially a way to say you can put records out there on the internet, just like you put your MX records and your other DNS records to show, like your phone book, where you are in the world and how to contact you. You can have a record that says, listen, here are all the places you should expect to receive email from me, if that makes sense. These are the places that are allowed to send email on my behalf. Anywhere else is probably not me.
Okay.
So then you can have a module that will actually look that record up. So when it receives an email...
This is by the DNS address?
Exactly. So it's looking up in DNS, this SPF record. Okay. And it says, all right, this is from GFI.com. Let me take a look at the SPF record. Okay, here are all the addresses it can come from. But this address is different. This IP address isn't on that list. This is very likely a forged sender.
Gotcha.
So that's a way to prevent a lot of those emails from even getting into the system.
Which will then in turn prevent the spoofing.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Another big one that has always, as long as I have looked at spam, been a huge problem, and it probably accounts for a majority of the spam on the internet, and I mean in the 80%, right, are these directory harvesting emails. And what that means is I'm a spammer, and I have GFI.com's domain name. Mm-hmm. So I can likely expect that there would be a certain naming convention that they would use for their email addresses. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send an email to John J at GFI.com, Bill O at GFI.com, ABC123 at GFI.com, every single permutation or combination I can think of. And there's a good possibility I'll get some of those right. And those emails will be delivered to users. The rest of those emails, however, since they're not addressed to anyone that really exists, for a long time, Exchange servers would send out a non-delivery receipt. I can't deliver this email because the user doesn't exist. Right. So every one of those hundreds of thousands of emails that might hit your domain is getting kicked back, but it still has to be processed. It generates an NDR, so your machine slows to a crawl. And then even worse, let's say the original from address of that email was spoofed, and it was xyz.com. Well, that means the GFI.com server is going to receive that email, say this guy doesn't exist. Guess where the non-delivery receipt's going to go to? The spoofed address,
right,
xyz.com.
Exactly.
So you just contributed to spam.
You've just you've just added to your own problem right there.
And somebody else's. Right now, xyz.com is getting hammered with spam as well from your server, NDR floods.
I tell you what, we need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll be back with more with Gil Langston at GFI, and I've got a horror story for you that I want to share with everybody. It really happened. We'll be right back in about a minute.
GFI software provides a single source for networking, security, monitoring, and hosted IT solutions for small to medium enterprises. GFI's extensive suite of award-winning on-premise solutions includes anti-spam, email security, email archiving, endpoint antivirus, centrally managed backup, event log management, server-based faxing, network monitoring, removable device control, vulnerability scanning and patch management, and web filtering and security. GFI also offers a suite of hosted solutions including email security and continuity, frontline email defense, and monitoring and remote management. With award-winning technology, an aggressive pricing strategy, and a strong focus on the unique requirements of small to medium-sized enterprises, GFI software can satisfy your needs on a global scale. Please visit us online at www.gfi.com.
And we're back with Gil Langston from GFI. We were talking about, we spent the first part of the show talking a lot about what spammers are doing and how they're doing it. real true story for you. This happened a couple of years ago. There was a mortgage company who had a female employee who was getting emails from a coworker, and basically printed those emails out because they were not nice. Let's just put it that way. They were most unpleasant. She printed them out and took them right to an attorney because these things clearly violated the policy of the company on sexual harassment and that kind of thing. And it cost this company a lot of money. Now, the point I'm bringing up is sometimes let's forget all about the Viagra ads and let's forget about that stuff. But what about content of the email that may be objectionable? Email going in and out of your email server. Maybe employees circulating some stuff around the office that they shouldn't be. Is there a way to handle that? I bet you there is.
Oh, yeah, there definitely is.
But
I want to speak to what you're talking about, right? I mean, when an organization has an email server and all the people in that organization are using that email server, just because you have an email address with your company doesn't necessarily mean you own that email. That is still corporate email. Mm-hmm. So you, as a company, are and can be responsible for the content that is sent. So if you're not monitoring a lot of that content, especially when it is something that could be in direct violation of your written HR policy, then, as you said, Bruce, you could be on the hook for something that one of your employees said to somebody else inside the company or even outside the company. So it is important to at least monitor that content, block offensive content. And I guess what you were alluding to earlier is GFI mail security.
I was.
Right, which can have rules that take a look at content and can quarantine emails that are offensive, racial, profanity, or even any other informational. I mean, sometimes maybe you want to protect intellectual property and you don't want certain phrases about some upcoming deal or something to go out of your system. Well, then you need something that can manage that content and protect you from it just going out on its own.
Well, I think one thing, for example, that's vital important. Let's say I've got, sales guys, okay? Sales guys should have no reason to be emailing, company financial information to somebody outside of the company, or it shouldn't even have it, right?
I should hope not.
You should hope not, right? But you could, with something like mail security, you could set up a rule that if a certain group of users would quarantine an outbound email that may contain a spreadsheet, because they would have no reason to be doing that.
Oh, absolutely. So
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I was just going to say, besides just the content in general, you're right. Attachments, right?
Right.
There are so many different types of attachments, and there are a lot of people who just don't want to allow any old attachment to go out. So the same thing applies here as it does for content. You can keep a group of people from sending out any type of attachment and quarantine those so you can investigate them at least first and then release them if need be. And that's inbound and outbound.
Well, listen, I know there's going to be a lot of folks watching this show, and I don't know about, what your experience has been, Gil, but I have seen people use an Exchange server like you would a public library.
Oh, file server extraordinaire, right?
Right? I mean, they're passing MP3 files around. They're passing video clips around, funny photos. And there's a copy and another copy and another copy and a copy. And guess what happens? An Exchange server has an information store. It's a big monolithic database. And it is a monolithic database. And it just grows and it grows and it grows. All because of this kind of stuff. Well, with the attachment blocking on, say, by using something like mail security, would stop a lot of that. It would quarantine those, and it would notify the network administrator, the email administrator, there's a problem here with some of these folks. You need to deal with it.
Absolutely.
So, but also, the thing about it is, when you talk about going back to spam, that, people trying to get you to open these attachments, right?
Right.
One virus scanner may not be enough. let's just face reality there. I mean, there's plenty of times that one virus scanner the definitions may have not caught up with something and another company's has, etc.
Right.
There's a way to use multiple antivirus scanners to look at that email, inbound and outbound, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit.
So, what's really important, as you said, is that you can use multiple engines in something like a gateway scanner because you can utilize their plugins that will then scan that email, pass it off to the next. You run challenges when you're trying to run multiple types of antivirus on your end user machine, but at the gateway level with these plugins, you really can have several layers of protection. And one thing I always say around that is there are 5 engines you can run in GFI Mail Security, and somebody will ask me, well, what if I already have one of these brands on my endpoint machines? Mm-hmm. Do I really need to have it in GFI Mail Security too? And a lot of times I'll say no, not necessarily. So spend your money on a different one. Mm-hmm. Put a different engine in at that level so that you have that layer of protection. One time one guy's going to catch it the first day. The next time, another guy's going to catch it the first day, while a third one might not even catch that one at all, just depending on their definitions, their team, the research that they do. They just are not all going to come to the same conclusions about the same types of malware at the same time.
Now, are we also doing things like reverse DNS lookups at the same time? We're doing, in other words, are we doing multiple operations on that inbound email at once, or are we going through like a series of checkpoints? Are we doing this, and then we do this, and we do this? In other words, are we losing or taking a performance hit by setting up this gauntlet, or is it very, very efficient?
Well, it is efficient, but I'll speak to that a little bit because, Granted, anytime you run another program on a machine that's already running something, sure, it is going to take some resources to run. It's going to take memory, it's going to take processing power, but remember the downside, and that is doing nothing. If you do nothing, then your Exchange server is going to take the hit. It is going to have to work harder. It's going to get clogged up with garbage. So, even though that installing a program on your Exchange server might take a little bit more resources, it's really protecting you from losing those resources in the long run.
That's a good way to put it. Clogging up your Exchange server with clogged with garbage, because that's exactly what's going on there. There's other ways to handle this. I know that for one, that there's a hosted version of sort of like Mail Essentials and Mail Security, where you can basically point your records to I think GFI calls it Max Mail.
GFI Max Mail Protection.
Yeah,
that's right.
And you can point your MX records to that, and so none of that processing power is given up on your side of the network.
Agreed.
It's all handled by the servers at GFI, and then that clean mail, good mail, is then delivered to you. And if there is something caught in spam, let's talk about quarantining for just a little bit.
Okay.
Not every time do these systems get it right.
Sure.
Sometimes they make a mistake. Did you watch Watson on Jeopardy, by the way?
I did not.
I
didn't get a chance to see it yet. I can't wait to, though. I'm going to watch a replay.
It was a totally awesome thing, but once in a while, Watson would make a goofy mistake. He didn't know he didn't know that Toronto wasn't in the United States, for example. But they do make mistakes, and so that's the purpose of a quarantine. Is it not to say we're not deleting it? We just want to notify you. We suspect this email is spam or is sent to you by the black hats, right?
That's a great way to put it, right? It's suspected spam. Maybe it had a few things in it that triggered some alarms that said, this very well could be spam. It doesn't throw up all the red flags. So maybe we want to quarantine that and let somebody make a decision about that and then have it delivered. And that works really well for a hosted platform like GFI Max Mail Protection. because one of the concerns is, yeah, great, the processing power is GFI is handling that. They're handling all of that garbage, if you will. But what happens? What kind of control do I get when something is quarantined? And there's a couple of different ways that you get that, right? So you can have the users receive a quarantine digest that lets them view just basic information about the mail, sender, recipient, subject, and they can log in and look at that mail in the portal and then decide, I want that. Release, release, release. Or the administrator can do the same thing. These emails need to be released to these users. Please go ahead and release it. Now, I will tell you that recently we added that same functionality into GFI Mail Essentials server-based as well. So the exact same thing can happen there. You can have a quarantine that prevents that email from ever even getting into your Exchange server, sitting off to the side in the quarantine, and the users can receive a digest, and they can release their own spam. Now, in the newest version, they can actually whitelist that sender as well. So not just release it, but put that sender on a whitelist to say, I trust this guy. Stop blocking his email and go ahead and send it to me.
Let's maybe shifting gears for just a moment here. When you're dealing with an anti-spam product, doesn't matter whether it's Mail Essentials, whatever, but there's a certain way I think that you attack it, right? And the first thing that you want to do, and I always liked the DNS Blacklist,
right,
as like being the first acid test. This was prior to gray listing, okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so prior to gray listing, other than gray listing, the first acid test is this sender on a DNS blacklist. If it is, reject, reject and delete, be done with it. Don't even send it on its way.
Right.
Okay, do you agree with that, or is there something you think that would be better?
Well, it does depend on the environment, right? And we talked about people accidentally getting put on blacklists sometimes. So there are some people who have concerns about that. One of my personal favorites, let's say I was talking to a customer and they wanted some advice. How should I set these up to start before I adjust them? Because they are adjustable. You can change the order of the modules for your needs because it's one module, next module, next module.
Right.
For me, the directory harvesting was a big one at the top because those users don't exist. Those recipients are not real. So now directory harvesting can be done at the connection level before the email is even downloaded into the server to be scanned.
Okay.
You can look at that recipient and say, this guy doesn't exist. Close that connection. So let's save the bandwidth of even downloading the email.
Okay.
So that speeds up processing. But then you're right. Your blacklists, your block lists up pretty high. These days, we talked about spoofing. Sender policy framework generally can be up there. So the blacklists, directory harvesting, sender policy framework up there. And then there are some things like keyword checking, where you can have certain keywords you just don't want to allow to block as spam. So that helps you adjust as things change.
Whatever happened to Bayesian Analysis? I remember that was the darling of the industry, Bayesian Analysis. Oh,
yes, Bayesian Analysis.
Yeah, right. So
you can determine future results by past actions, right?
Is that the Lindsay Lohan of spam filters now? I mean, what?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it still works. It still does exactly that. It can learn from your outbound email. You can train it on inbound email. This is spam. This is not spam. We have another module we added recently called Spam Razor.
Oh yeah,
and it's a great module because it's updatable. So you let us take care of updating the newest trends in spam, be it IP reputation. Maybe part of that IP address is from a area where there are a lot of spammy people. Maybe there are certain words that trigger alerts. Maybe there's just an overall signature of that email altogether that says, we've seen this before, definitely spam. So this is an adaptable, on-the-fly, in the background type of module that can be updated. So it can catch a lot, and I think that it really surpassed the Bayesian Analysis filter in what it was catching.
I like Spam Razor, and because I've set up like a spam assassin type deal before based on open source stuff. Spam Razor isn't like an add-on to that. Spam Razor or the Razor basically, right, they're cataloging spam and basically giving it a signature and like a confidence score.
That's right.
And as based on open source community of people that are looking at this stuff and adding it to a database, and just the wording, the phrasing, etc. It looks like this kind of spam,
right.
and then that in turn updates the Spam Razor, which is actually really cool technology, and it's lightning fast as well.
I mean, it's a lot like antivirus definitions, right?
That's what I was thinking. It's sort of along that lines, heuristic analysis of the spam coming in, way different than the Bayesian filter.
Well, right. I mean, the Bayesian looks at chunks of content and learns from that. Are these words okay? A doctor's office is going to have a different set of words, than a church, if you will, if you can just use your imagination there. Then,
wait, I think we just might have got the title for today's episode, Use Your Imagination.
There you go. So there are certain body parts that a doctor's office might have to send out that would simply be absolutely unacceptable for a church, and those kind of things Bayesian can do. But the Spam Razor is an all-in-all big picture, signature-based pattern, so it is very adaptable.
So we've got a few minutes left of this episode. We've covered kind of a lot of things, very, very. I think there's been some depth there. What are some best practices? You've got a new company. Let's just put you in the role as an IT consultant. Okay. Your company's been hired to come in and set up my email server for my new company.
Right.
Okay. What are some of the best practices you're going to advise me to do?
Well, it does depend, of course, on what version of Exchange and all that. But we talked about that a little bit.
We've got the latest and greatest, baby. We got the latest and greatest. Right? Okay.
So you want to harden access to the server. And then before anything else, you have to put the anti-spam and the antivirus and the attachment checking in place. But you do have to decide on a corporate level what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what exposure. Are there any regulations that we have to deal with that are going to affect the way we handle mail, and set those up from the beginning. But really something like Mail Essentials and Mail Security on the server, or even better, in front of the server if you want. Maybe you don't want them on the server. Put them on a relay in front, or make that decision about, this server is going to be busy. We're going to be tasking it with a lot of different things to serve up. Maybe we do want to simply move that into the cloud, into a hosted situation where someone else can handle that. And that way, the Exchange server is, the stores, as you mentioned, are not going to grow as quickly. And that server is just going to run lean and mean. Now, and there's one other thing I want to mention, too. We're currently working on an appliance-based solution that will be very similar to both of these solutions as well. Our thought is that you should have choice. So maybe you do want a box in front of the Exchange server rather than a Windows-based server. So it's important to be able to choose, but you have to have a policy. Step one is the policy. What do you care about? What are the legal ramifications of not doing these sort of things? And also, though, one thing to consider is the level of, I guess, competency of your users. If you're working in a shop with administrative people, might be a different set of rules than if you have a shop that is all developers and tech-savvy people, or you might have a combination thereof. So being able to do things by groups and users in a lot of these is very important, and being that granular, because what's good for Joe the developer might not be so good for Ann the accountant, let's say.
Right.
And it is very important, aggressiveness level and all of those things. You want to be able to support all those. So come up with a good policy first, and then come up with a product that can help you achieve that level of granularity.
Well, those are very good ideas. I think ultimately it boils down to making sure that your employees are not being presented with an opportunity to create damage.
That's it.
Okay, and whether that is through clicking on attachments in an email, clicking on links on an email, those can ultimately result in damage, and that's measurable in very real dollar terms.
Agreed.
Okay, and the bottom line is you cannot depend on client-side antivirus software to do everything. You want to eliminate this before the source. We've given you some reasons, including that Exchange information store getting dangerously out of control, number one.
Right.
Okay? Because as long as there's room, Exchange is pretty well a self-running system and doesn't complain much. And that thing will just grow and grow and grow until the day the server is unreachable.
That's right.
Okay? And now you're totally down. We've also discussed the real damage that can be inflicted to you if you own this company, if you're responsible for people passing around email that they shouldn't be, with content they shouldn't be. Right. Measurable in real dollars, right?
Oh, it is, absolutely.
I mean, a lawsuit, no matter what, I don't care how innocent you are, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars to defend, even if it's the most stupidest, dumbest lawsuit you ever heard of.
And that's win or lose. That's right.
Win, lose, or draw, because that's just the way it works here, which is asinine in my opinion.
Well, yeah, that's a topic for another show.
Really, you got to pay even when you're innocent? Don't you think you should put everything on the loser? I don't know.
That's right.
But it's all very, very real. One thing we've not touched on, and I think we should just briefly, because I really want to, this is something very near and dear to my heart, which is storing and finding email. Right? We haven't really touched upon that. You wouldn't want to archive spam.
No, not at all.
Right?
What's the point in that?
But if you're not doing this effectively, that's effectively what you're doing right now. You're doing it in an Exchange information store.
That's right.
Okay. Imagine, I know it sounds incredible, but there are people out there that are basically just using the free stuff that, comes with Exchange, comes from Microsoft, and calls it a day for protecting their email. And that is incredulous to me.
It really is. I mean, you need something that...
Incredulous?
Yeah, we'll take it.
Okay.
It is. I mean, because the more stuff that gets into that Exchange server, and you mentioned archiving. So
yeah.
If you are using an archiving product, then for a compliance need or whatever else you want to use it for, and you're archiving spam, you're wasting space again. So you're doing it twice now. So it doesn't make sense if you catch that at the beginning with as many different things as you can to keep yourself protected and just avoid that even getting to the Exchange store, then of course it's not going to be archived either.
I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm going to take a leap of faith on this. I believe a day is going to come where if you operate a business over so many people, whatever, there's going to be a cybersecurity mandate that you got to follow. Like a very minimum set of security standards that the government's going to say. I just believe this is going to happen.
You think so?
Yeah, I do. I think that if you're a company over X number of employees, you've got to have these type of data security standards in place.
Right. So it'll be similar to, let's say, car inspections, right? I mean,
exactly.
There's a bare minimum criteria that you have to meet to be able to run on the road.
Exactly.
Right.
I believe that day is not far down the road.
Quite possibly. I mean, it makes sense. And as many threats as there are out there now, to go out there and put yourself, and then, as we mentioned, some of these little tricks, other companies at risk, means you're not a good corporate citizen. So, I guess I could see that.
Well,
actually.
Tell me what business anymore doesn't really collect information on its customers?
any business that wants to stay in business is going to do just that.
Okay. And right now there's no federal mandate that I'm aware of that, that is broad blanket that says you've got to at least have these minimum standards in place if you're going to handle customer data.
Just for basic customer data, maybe not. I mean, you start getting into, we've talked about it before,
yeah,
right?
I mean,
PCI
there are
DSS.
things like HIPAA and PCI DSS, okay.
Yeah.
But those don't cover, those aren't across the board.
Right.
Okay.
It's not just name and phone number type information.
I believe that the same type of rules that fall into place, like employee safety standards and the way that you have to pay people and all that sort of thing. I think it's no impossibility that the government won't come out and say, you know what, here you got over 50 employees or whatever. This is how you have to secure your data. This is the minimum standards you have to do. I just believe that's going to happen someday.
You heard it here first, people.
You did. And I could be all wet, but come on, they're regulating everything, right?
They are. That's what they do.
I mean, who knows? But Gil, it's been a real pleasure having you on this month's edition of Windows Security Monthly. The whole spam thing is got a lot of moving parts, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, we could go on and on for hours probably about spam.
That's because we're a couple nerds.
Yeah, well, that is true, right? I mean, if my wife were listening to this right now and heard me say that, she'd be rolling her eyes, I'm sure. So.
Oh, yeah. But it is important, and keeping people safe on your network is important. And we're trying to help people save money and learn a little bit about some things about spam. I hope you did on this episode. We appreciate everybody coming by. And we'll be back again next month, the third Friday of the month, with the next edition of Windows Security Monthly. Remember, it's in your shop, not making any money or saving you money. Get it out of there. This is Bruce Naylor, your Frugal Tech. I'll talk to you later.